The WWII's miracle fabric that saved soldiers' lives. How nylon changed survival forever. The moment silk disappeared from the battlefield, lives were suddenly hanging by a thread, and that thread turned out to be nylon. During World War II, survival didn't just depend on weapons or tactics. It depended on what you wore, what you carried, and what held together when everything else failed. One fabric, born quietly in a laboratory just years before the war, became a hidden lifesaver. It was lighter than anything soldiers had known, stronger than steel by weight. And unlike traditional fibres, it didn't rot, stretch or collapse when soaked. This was nylon, and it reshaped survival in ways most people never hear about. This isn't a story about fashion. It's a story about physics, desperation, and how a single material quietly tipped the odds between life and death. A world on the brink of running out of silk, can you imagine? Before the turmoil of World War II, silk was the undisputed king. Parachutes were crafted from silk. Maps, too, were printed on this luxurious fabric. Medical sutures relied on its strength. Even some powder bags and equipment covers depended on it. Silk was light, flexible, and incredibly strong for its weight. But, the problem was as simple as it was brutal. Silk came almost entirely from Asia. As the war expanded across the vast Pacific, supply lines snapped like fragile threads. Japan, with its strategic maneuvers, controlled major silk-producing regions. And just like that, Allied forces found themselves cut off from a material they had built entire systems around. Parachutes could no longer be guaranteed. Medical supplies, too, fell under intense pressure. Specialized equipment faced shortages that wool or cotton simply could not solve. Now the military didn't just need a replacement. Oh no, it needed something better, something that could stand the test of war and innovation. Nylon had been invented in the late 1930s by chemists searching for synthetic alternatives to natural fibres. At first it was seen as a novelty. Strong, yes. Smooth, yes. But, untested at scale. Then war arrived, and nylon was pushed from laboratory curiosity to frontline necessity almost overnight. Here's the key detail that made nylon revolutionary. It was stronger than silk by weight, completely synthetic, and could be produced domestically in massive quantities. No farms, no worms, no overseas shipping lanes. Just chemistry, factories, and speed. For survival, that combination was gold. The most immediate life-saving use of nylon was parachutes. Early silk parachutes worked well in ideal conditions, but silk weakened when wet and degraded over time. Nylon didn't. It retained strength in rain, snow, and humidity. It resisted mildew, and it handled sudden shock loads better during deployment. That mattered because a parachute isn't just fabric, it's a promise. A promise that when a pilot bails out at altitude, the canopy will open, hold, and not tear apart under stress. Nylon delivered on that promise more consistently than silk ever could. By the middle of the war, nylon parachutes became standard for Allied forces. Pilots trusted them. Paratroopers depended on them. Thousands of men hit the ground alive because nylon did not snap, stretch or fail when conditions turned ugly. Now, this is where things get clever. Beyond parachutes, nylon transformed field survival gear. Rain capes, ponchos, pack covers and shelter components began shifting toward nylon-based fabrics. You see, traditional materials like wool absorbed water, became heavy and took forever to dry. Cotton rotted and lost strength when wet. And rubberized fabrics, well, they cracked and stiffened in cold weather. Nylon changed that equation. It was light even when soaked. It dried fast. It resisted tearing. And when treated or layered properly, it became effectively waterproof without turning into a stiff sheet. For soldiers in exposed environments, jungles, mountains, coastal regions, this mattered more than comfort. Staying dry meant avoiding hypothermia. It meant fewer infections. It meant better mobility. Nylon helped soldiers conserve energy and body heat when the environment was trying to drain both. One of the most overlooked survival tools of the war was the silk map. These were maps printed on fabric so they could be folded silently, hidden easily, and survive rough handling. When silk supplies dried up, nylon stepped in. Nylon maps didn't tear when stuffed into boots or sewn into jackets. They didn't dissolve in rain. They didn't turn into pulp when soaked. Escape and evasion kits relied on them. Downed airmen carried them as lifelines. You know, this wasn't just about convenience. This was what we call survival intelligence. Imagine a map that survives water, survives chaos. Well, nylon made that possible at scale, my friends. Nylon, believe it or not, also found its way into battlefield medicine. Surgeons, they needed sutures that were strong, sterile and reliable. Sure, silk sutures existed, but they had their downsides. They could harbour bacteria and degrade over time. Nylon sutures, on the other hand, offered strength with less risk of infection and more predictable performance. In those days, before antibiotics were widely available or effective, reducing infection risk was, well, everything. Clean closures meant better healing, and better healing meant fewer amputations. Fewer amputations meant more soldiers returning home whole. This is the part people rarely talk about. Fabric doesn't just save lives in dramatic moments. Sometimes it saves them quietly, stitch by stitch. Here's the practical survival lesson buried in all this history. Weight matters. Every ounce a soldier carries drains energy. Every soaked garment slows movement. Nylon delivered strength without the penalty. Ropes, cords, straps and webbing made from nylon replaced heavier natural fibres. They didn't snap under tension. They didn't swell with water. They didn't fray as quickly. In rescue situations, supply drops and improvised shelters, nylon components held when others failed. For survival, reliability beats tradition every time. Even though nylon feels modern today, its success during World War II fits perfectly into the before modern times mindset. Soldiers didn't have advanced membranes, breathable laminates, or smart fabrics. They had to rely on simple physical properties: tensile strength, water, resistance, durability. Nylon delivered all three without electricity, electronics, or complex maintenance. It worked in mud, it worked in snow, it worked after weeks of abuse. That's why it spread so fast once proven. You know, the war didn't just use nylon, it stress-tested it under the worst conditions imaginable. After the war, nylon didn't disappear. In fact, it flooded civilian life. Tents, rucksacks, fishing line, clothing, nylon was everywhere. But you see, its wartime legacy remained embedded in survival design. Lightweight strength became the gold standard, and water resistance became, well, non-negotiable. Every modern outdoor fabric, really, owes something to nylon's wartime debut. But the original lesson still stands. When resources are scarce and conditions are brutal, the right material can make the difference between endurance and collapse. You know, this isn't just history trivia. It's really a reminder that survival isn't always about tools or weapons. Sometimes it's about what holds together when everything else, well, just falls apart. Nylon didn't win the war, but honestly it saved lives quietly, consistently, and without headlines. It replaced fragile systems with resilient ones, and it proved that innovation doesn't have to be loud to be, you know, deadly effective. Here's the interesting part. Most of the soldiers who depended on nylon never knew how revolutionary it was. They just knew it worked. And in survival, that's everything. If stories like this matter to you, stories of forgotten ingenuity, pre-modern problem-solving, and the quiet technologies that shaped history, then you're in the right place. Like the video if this surprised you. Share it with someone who loves hidden history. And subscribe to Before Modern Times for more true stories of how people survived long before modern tech did the heavy lifting. Because the past still has a lot to teach us if we know where to look.